everybody, Dr. B here. Hope you're all doing well. I wanted to record my own lecture on sonnets because this is what I would be doing in class, if we were together. And of course, it's unfortunate that I was cut off, right when I was getting ready to do that. But, College Board, those AP teachers last week, they were talking about sonnets. And, in particular, I like to teach poetry, as you all know, March and April, right before the exam. But the schedule, I guess we could call it that. I don't know. I've never worried too much about it in the past. The schedule for this course incorporates a little bit of poetry as we go along. So I think the assumption with those lessons that you watched last week was that you had already had at least a bit of this. So I think it's really important that we talk about it because, who knows what's going to be on this exam. I suspect they're going to give you a poem, and it could very well be a sonnet. It could be something, more contemporary. I mean, we just don't know. We'll know more on April 3rd. And then I think they're going to give you some sort of narrative, prose narrative, and ask you to write something about that. So anyway, I want to go back now and cover sonnets. So I have two videos. This first one is going to be on the Italian sonnet, or the Petrarchan, as they called it last week. This comes from Francis Petrarch in the 14th century in Italian. And so mainly when we talk about sonnets, often we divide them into two groups. We have the Italian sonnets and the English sonnets, or the Shakespearean sonnets. Sir Philip Sidney also wrote sonnets, so it wasn't just Shakespeare. And then, interestingly enough, there are actually some sonnets that are hybrids. So, that's where you have poets who sort of experiment. And they mentioned that in the class last week, so I thought that was really good. But I wouldn't expect them to get too creative on the exam. So I just want to make sure you understand what an Italian sonnet is and what an English sonnet is, and that you know how to figure out which it is. So let's start with how we figure that out. So this one is by William Wordsworth. It's a really famous one. It's called London 1802. And, well, let me just read through it first, and then we'll talk about it. Okay. Milton. And he's talking here about John Milton, who's known as the father of English poetry, who had been dead for a couple of hundred years at this time. Milton, thou shouldst be living at this hour. Now, what do you do with that? You just translate it, right? You should be living at this hour. All right? England has need of you. She is a fen of stagnant waters, altar, sword, and pen. Fireside, the heroic wealth of Hull and Bower, have forfeited their ancient English dower, meaning dowry, of inward happiness. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up, return to us again. Give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. Your soul was like a star and dwelt apart. You had a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So did you travel on life's common way, in cheerful godliness, and yet your heart, the lowliest duties on herself did lay. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the rhyme scheme. And I hope that you guys are making some notes, because this is important. This is how you figure out which kind of sonnet we're dealing with, if it's English or if it's Italian. That is the key to unlocking the poem, okay? Because this is a very structured form. So here we have, of course, we know that it's 14 lines, and I'll talk more about structure in a minute, but let's go straight to rhyme scheme. So the Italian rhyme scheme, and you just have to memorize this, okay? It's A, B, B, A. So let's look at that. Hour is the first one, so that's A. Fen is a different sound, right? So that's B. Pen rhymes with fen, so that's also B. And then Bower, A, which rhymes back with hour. So again, A, B, B, A. And then it continues. A, B, B, A. So you've got an A, B, B, A and an A, B, B, A. Well, here's the point. So when you read a sonnet, if you can tell in the first 4 lines, and you should be able to do that, hey, this is A, B, B, A. Gee, this is an Italian sonnet. Okay, that should be clear. And that's so important, because what that lets you know is, well, then that tells me how I need to approach this poem. That tells me how I need to look at the structure of this poem to unlock the meaning. Okay? You know, I've talked before about how structure is so terribly important, and it really is, because that is how we figure out what's going on with this poem. All right, so again, Italian is A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A, and then the last 6 lines are going to be some combination of C, D, and E. I mean, you might find a sonnet that has C, D, C, D, C, D, or C, D, E, C, D, E. You know, that can vary, okay? But you're always going to have the A, B, B, A, B, B, A. All right? Now, all right, so we have 2 units, really. All right, so I want to show you what I'm talking about here. All right, so see the part I've highlighted. So these first 8 lines, these are known as the octave, okay? Oct and 8, okay, like an octagon. So octave, O-C-T-A-V-E, octave. All right, so that is a unit. That means when you know that you are reading an Italian sonnet, you need to be looking at those 8 lines as a unit. That means there's something being expressed in those 8 lines, okay, some thought. All right, then we move on to the next part, which is the next 6 lines. And so you have the octave in the first 8. This is known as the sestet, okay, for 6. S-E-S-T-E-T, sestet. This is the sestet, okay? So again, these 6 lines are meant to be looked at as a unit. And usually, you know, whatever is set forth in the octave, the sestet responds to it in some way, okay? Now, in this particular case, and this isn't always the case, but in this particular sonnet, we have a problem solution structure. So let's look at what the speaker is saying. He calls on John Milton, who's the father of English poetry, and he calls on him. And of course, this is apostrophe. We've talked about that before, right? Talking to someone who is not there and not able to answer, right? So Milton, he's addressing him. You should be living at this hour. I wish you were here now, right? England needs you. Why? Look what comes after the colon. She is a fen of stagnant waters, altar, sword, and pen. So altar represents the church, sword represents military might, pen is writers. Stagnant, everybody knows what stagnant means. She is a fen of stagnant waters. So nothing is growing or changing. Everything is just stagnant. Fireside, the heroic wealth of Hall and Bower have forfeited their ancient English dowry of inward happiness. So he's criticizing society. He's criticizing his own English contemporary society. We are selfish men. Oh, raise us up, return to us again, talking to Milton, and give us manners, virtue, freedom, power. So these are the characteristics right here. Those are the characteristics that the speaker believes that Milton held, and that, you know, the speaker believes that society should come back to these, you know, and possess those. So now, this is again, the octave again is showing what's happening in England at this time, what the speaker's view is of society, that they're not going anywhere, that they're stagnant, and believes that Milton, you know, would be a model for a better society. So look at what we have now in the sestet, holding up Milton as this wonderful model. Your soul was like a star and dwelt apart. If it dwells apart, it's above everyone else. It's majestic, you know, it's honorable, special. You had a voice whose sound was like the sea, pure as the naked heavens, majestic, free. So using nature to laud Milton. So did you travel on life's common way in cheerful godliness, and yet your heart, the lowliest duties on herself did lay. So pointing out Milton as being this great and majestic life force, and yet a very humble man. Again, the father of English poetry. So that is what's going on here. So the key is to ask ourselves what's going on in the first 8 lines, and then what's happening in the following 6 to respond to those first 8 lines in some way. All right. Now, another point about the sonnet, and they talked about this last week, there's always something called a turn. Okay, it's a turn, it's a major shift, and it always occurs in line 9 in the Italian sonnet. So you can see that because the first 8 lines are talking about situation in English society as the speaker sees them, a bad state of affairs, and then we move on to the next part. Your soul was like a star. So you can see that there is a transition to now talking about Milton and how the speaker believes that if they all tried to be more like Milton, that society would be much better. There's a lot of imagery here, a lot of descriptive words about Milton, his wonderful qualities. And again, back up here in line 3, we have some symbolism, right? As I pointed out, we have use of the word stagnant. That's an important bit of diction, I think, there. We have altar, sword, and pen. So, representing institutions that the speaker feels are going nowhere at this point. And again, the speaker longs for society to improve itself and to get moving in a positive direction again. All right, so that is it for this first installment. I hope you will check out my next one where I'm going to talk about the English sonnet. All right, so hang on.